New today, South Carolina's Attorney General Alan Wilson released the state's annual report on human trafficking for 2022 about an hour ago. Human trafficking is the second largest and fastest growing crime in the world. Each year, the report details what the state task force is doing to prevent and protect victims of human trafficking and takes a look at how each county compares to one another. We're hearing from local law enforcement and communities how they can come together in this fight.
It's important for law enforcement agencies around the state to work with us to investigate the crimes head on. I urge all law enforcement partners to continue working with our state and regional human trafficking task forces to ensure that we are recognized across the state and that South Carolina receives an equal level of law enforcement service no matter what community you live in. With more knowledge and training and understanding of how these crimes are committed, we can better prevent and protect those that are most vulnerable populations of our communities.
If you or you know someone who is a victim of human trafficking, you can call the hotline number on your screen for help.